brushing against the hem of her dress as she walked from one house to the next. Her basket felt heavier with every mile, though not a single quilt had been sold that day. The sun was dipping low, stretching long shadows across the wooden fences and dry fields, and still no one had opened their door long enough to listen. She paused at the edge of a narrow path, glancing toward a farmhouse set apart from the others. It stood quiet, with peeling paint and a porch that leaned just a little to one side, as though it had grown tired of standing. Most folks would have turned away, saving their strength for a friendlier place, but she had come too far to stop now. Her hands tightened around the basket handle. Inside were quilts stitched with care, each one telling a story through careful patches and worn fabric. There were pieces from old shirts, faded dresses, and scraps saved through hard winters. They were not perfect, but they were honest, and they were all she had to offer. She had been walking roads like this for months. Since the last winter took more than it gave, she had learned not to expect kindness. Doors stayed shut, eyes turned away. People had their own troubles, and a stranger with quilts was just another reminder of how little there was to spare. Still, she stepped forward. The porch creaked beneath her feet as she climbed the steps. She hesitated before knocking, listening to the quiet. No voices, no movement. Just the faint sound of wind passing through the fields. For a moment she thought of turning back, but something held her there. She raised her hand and knocked. It took longer than expected before the door opened. When it did, it was only a little at first, just enough for a pair of watchful eyes to study her. Then the door widened, revealing a man who looked as worn as the house behind him. His shirt sleeves were rolled, his hands rough, and his face carried the kind of stillness that comes from years of keeping to oneself. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking. "I've got quilts," she said at last, her voice steady despite the long day. "Made them myself? Good for cold nights." He glanced down at the basket, then back at her. There was no quick refusal, no polite excuse. Just a quiet look, as if he were weighing something deeper than the price of cloth and thread. "Been a long road?" he asked. She gave a small nod. "Long enough." Another pause followed, stretching thin between them. She had seen this moment before, the moment when people decided whether to turn her away. She braced herself for it. But instead of closing the door, he opened it wider. "Let me see them," he said. Surprise flickered across her face, though she quickly masked it. She stepped inside, the wooden floor creaking beneath her worn shoes. The house was simple, almost bare, with a table set near a small window, and a stove that looked like it had seen better days. It wasn't much, but it was warm. She set the basket down and carefully unfolded one quilt after another. Each one spread across the table like a quiet story, colors muted but strong, stitches tight and sure. The man watched closely, his gaze moving over every detail. "These aren't factory work," he said. "No," she replied. "Every stitch by hand," he nodded, as if that mattered more than anything else. She waited for the usual question, how much, followed by the familiar hesitation, but it didn't come. Instead, he reached for one quilt, then another still, stacking them slowly. "I'll take them," he said. She blinked, certain she had misheard. "Which one?" "All of them." The words settled in the room, heavy and unexpected. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. No one had ever bought them all before. Most days, she was lucky to sell even one. "That's a lot," she managed. He shrugged lightly. "Cold nights come around more often than we like." There was something in his tone, something she couldn't quite place. Not pity, not charity, just a quiet decision made without fuss. As he gathered the quilts, he glanced toward the stove. "You eaten yet?" She hesitated. It wasn't a question she expected. "Not since morning." "Well," he said, moving toward a small cupboard. No sense talking business on an empty stomach. The smell of something warm soon filled the room, simple but inviting. She stood there, unsure whether to stay or go, unsure of what this moment meant. He set a place at the table, then another, and gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself into the chair slowly, her hands resting in her lap, her eyes drifting to the stack of quilts now resting in the corner. Everything about this felt unfamiliar, like stepping into a story she hadn't been told. As the first plate was set before her, she looked up at him, a question forming but never quite leaving her lips. Because something about this quiet house, this unexpected kindness, and the man who had bought every piece she carried felt like it was leading somewhere she could not yet see. And as the sun slipped below the horizon, leaving the world outside in shadow, she had the strange feeling that this supper was not the end of her long road, but the beginning of something far more uncertain. She picked up the fork slowly, as if the moment might break if she moved too quickly. The food was simple, beans and a piece of bread, but it smelled better than anything she had come across in days. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet was not uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. Like two people trying to understand the shape of something new without naming it. "You travel alone?" he asked after a time, keeping his eyes on his plate. "I do," she said. "Been that way since last winter." He gave a small nod as if that answered more than she had said. "Hard season." "It was," she replied, her voice steady but softer now. "Took more than crops. Took people too." The man didn't ask who he didn't need to. Out here, everyone had lost something. Some lost land, some lost family, and some lost the kind of life they once thought would never change. She took another bite, then glanced toward the stack of quilts in the corner. "You must have a big house to need that many." He gave a faint smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "House isn't big, just empty." The words lingered between them. She looked down again, unsure whether to press further. There was a weight in his voice. Something carried quietly for a long time. "You always live out here?" she asked instead. "Long as I can remember," he said. "Place belonged to my folks before me. Back when the fields still gave something worth keeping. And now? Now they give what they can." He tore a piece of bread and set it aside. "Some years less than that." She understood that kind of answer. It was the kind that said more than it showed. She had walked through towns where windows were boarded and farms where the soil had turned stubborn and dry. People held on, not because it was easy, but because there was nowhere else to go. The lamp on the table flickered slightly as the evening grew darker. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the walls of the house. She wrapped her hands around the warmth of the plate, letting it settle her. "You don't ask many questions," she said after a while. He glanced at her, a hint of curiosity in his expression. "Should I?" "Most do," she replied. "They ask where I'm from, how I came to this, why I'm walking alone with nothing but quilts to sell." "And what do you tell them?" She paused, thinking. "Depends on how they ask." He leaned back slightly in his chair. "And if I asked?" She met his gaze for the first time without looking away. "I'd tell you I learned to sew from someone who believed hard work could keep a person steady. I'd tell you that when everything else fell apart, this was the one thing I could carry with me." He nodded slowly, as if he respected the answer without needing more. The room fell quiet again, but this time it felt different. Not just silence, but a kind of understanding that didn't need filling. After they finished eating, he stood and gathered the plates without a word. She moved to help, but he shook his head lightly. "You've done enough for the day," he said. "Sit." She hesitated, then did as he asked, watching as he worked with quiet ease. It struck her how used to being alone he must be, the way he moved without expecting help, the way he filled the silence without trying to chase it away. Her eyes wandered again, this time past the quilts, toward a small shelf near the far wall. There were only a few things there, a tin cup, an old book, and something folded neatly beside them. It looked like cloth, but different from the quilts she carried. Finer, maybe older. "Those yours?" she asked, nodding toward the shelf. He followed her gaze and went still for just a moment before answering. "They were." Something in his tone made her sit up a little straighter. "Were?" He dried his hands slowly before turning back to her. "Belonged to someone who used to fill this place with more than quiet." She didn't speak, sensing this was not something he shared easily. "She stitched too," he went on, his voice lower now. "Not for selling? Just for keeping the house warm?" Said every piece had a memory in it. Her eyes shifted to the folded cloth again. "What happened?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. For a moment, he didn't answer. The wind outside pressed harder against the walls, and the lamp flickered again, casting shadows that seemed to stretch across the room. "Some stories don't settle easy," he said at last. She nodded, understanding that meant enough. Still, something about the way he had bought every quilt, the way he had set a place for her at the table, and the way his voice changed when he spoke of the past, began to form a quiet question in her mind. It didn't feel like chance. She rose from her chair and walked slowly toward the stack of quilts, running her fingers lightly over the fabric. Each one had been made to be sold, to be traded for a few coins and a little hope for the next day. But now they sat in this quiet house, gathered by a man who hadn't even asked the price. "You didn't say what you planned to do with them," she said, her back still turned to him. There was a pause behind her. Then he answered, his voice steady but carrying something she could not yet name. "Thought I might start filling this place again." She turned to face him, her brow faintly furrowed. "With quilts?" she asked. He met her gaze, holding it longer this time. "Maybe with more than that." The words settled into the room, quiet but heavy, and she felt that same strange pull she had felt when she first stepped onto the porch. It wasn't just a supper. It wasn't just a sale. And as the wind howled low outside and the shadows deepened along the walls, she began to wonder if walking up to this house had not been an accident at all, but the first step into something she might not be ready to understand. She did not answer him right away. His words stayed in the air, quiet but pressing, as if they were waiting for her to decide what they meant. Filling a house again was no small thing, not out here where people were more used to losing than keeping. "You mean fixing it up?" she asked carefully. He shook his head once. "Not just the boards and roof." She studied him, trying to understand where he was leading. There was no rush in him, no push, just a steady kind of patience that made things feel more serious, not less. "I don't stay long in one place," she said after a moment. "Road doesn't allow it. Road takes plenty," he replied. "Doesn't give much back." She could not argue with that. Still, staying meant something else entirely. It meant trust and roots and the risk of losing again. The lamp flickered lower and he moved to adjust it. When he turned back, his eyes seemed sharper, as though he had made up his mind about something. "You ever think about putting those quilts somewhere they aren't just passing through?" he asked. She crossed her arms lightly, more to steady herself than anything else. "They go where they're needed." "And you?" The question landed harder than she expected. She had grown used to being part of the road, not separate from it. People asked about her quilts, not about her. "I go where I can sell enough to keep moving," she said. "That's not the same thing." She looked away, her gaze falling to the floorboards. He was right, and she did not like it. Not because it was untrue, but because it stirred something she had worked hard to keep quiet. Before she could answer, a sharp sound broke through the stillness. A knock, firm and sudden, came from the door. Both of them turned. It was late for visitors. Too late for anything friendly. The man stepped toward the door, his movements slower now, cautious. He glanced back at her once, as if weighing whether she should stay where she was. She stood anyway, her fingers brushing the edge of the table. The knock came again, louder this time. He opened the door just enough to see out, but the wind pushed it wider. A figure stood on the porch, wrapped in a coat dusted with dirt from the road. The face was shadowed, but the stance was firm, not someone asking for help. "Didn't expect company?" the visitor said, voice low. The man's shoulders tightened slightly. "What brings you this far out?" "Same thing that brings anyone," the visitor replied. "Looking for what's owed?" The air in the room shifted. She felt it at once, like a storm moving in before the sky had time to change. "There's nothing here for you," the man said. The visitor let out a small breath, almost a laugh. "That's not what I heard." Her eyes moved between them, trying to piece together what she had stepped into. The quilts, the quiet house, the strange kindness, it all began to feel connected in a way she had not seen before. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice steady but low. The man did not turn. "Just someone passing through?" "That's so?" The visitor said, now leaning slightly to look past him. "Doesn't seem like passing through to me." Their eyes met for a brief second, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Best be on your way," the man said, firmer now. The visitor did not move. "Word is you've been holding on to things longer than you should. Land, goods, maybe even memories." Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. "You got no claim here," the man replied. Maybe not yet, the visitor said. But times change. People who can't keep up tend to lose what they've got. The wind pushed harder against the door, making it creak. She stepped closer without thinking, her presence now clear beside him. We're not looking for trouble, she said. The visitor studied her, eyes narrowing slightly. You new to this place? She's leaving, the man said quickly. She turned to him, surprised at how certain he sounded. The visitor caught it too. Doesn't sound like it, he said. Sounds like she just arrived? Another pause stretched between them, thicker than before. You've got until the end of the week, the visitor continued. After that, I come back with more than words, and if I'm still here, the man asked. The visitor's expression did not change. Then you'll have to decide what matters enough to keep. With that, he stepped back, boots thudding against the porch as he turned away. The sound of his steps faded into the wind, leaving the house quiet again, but not the same kind of quiet as before. The man closed the door slowly, his hand lingering on it for a moment. She watched him, questions rising faster now. What was that about? He did not answer right away. Instead, he walked back to the table and rested his hands against it, his head lowered slightly. Trouble that doesn't leave easy, he said at last. You owe him something? She pressed. He shook his head. Not the way he thinks. That didn't sound like a simple misunderstanding. It's not. She stepped closer, her voice firmer now. Then tell me what it is. He looked up at her, and for the first time, there was something close to urgency in his eyes. This land, this house, everything here, it's tied to more than just me, he said. And there are people who believe they can take it. Can they? She asked. He held her gaze. Only if I let them. The word settled deep, carrying weight she could not ignore. Her thoughts raced. She had come here to sell quilts, to earn enough to move on. Now she stood in a house that might not even belong to the man who had bought them, facing a threat that had nothing to do with her, yet somehow pulled her in. You should leave before this gets worse, he said quietly. She looked at the quilts stacked in the corner, then back at him. And you? She asked. He did not answer. Outside, the wind kept rising, and somewhere in the distance, a loose shutter banged against wood, sharp and steady, like a warning that would not fade. The house felt smaller after the visitor left, as if the walls had drawn in closer to listen. She stood near the table, her hands resting against the worn wood while he remained where he was, quiet and still, like he was measuring something that could not be seen. You knew he'd come, she said at last. He did not deny it. Figured I had more time. And now? Now it's running short. The lamp gave a low flicker, and he reached out to steady it, though it did not need steadying. It seemed more like something to do with his hands. She walked to the window and looked out into the dark. The road was empty again, but it did not feel empty the way it had before. It felt watched, like the land itself was holding its breath. You said this place is tied to more than you, she said, turning back. What does that mean? He took a slow breath, then pulled out a chair and sat down, motioning for her to do the same. She hesitated, then joined him, sensing this was not something he had shared in a long time. My folks built this place when the land was still good, he began. Not rich, not easy, but steady. They believed if you worked it right, it would hold you through. She nodded, listening. After they were gone, it was just me and... He stopped, his gaze drifting toward the small shelf again. Just me and the one who stayed? The one who stitched, she said softly. He gave a faint nod. She saw things different. Said a house wasn't just wood and nails. Said it needed something living in it. Something made by hand, something that held memory. Her eyes moved to the folded cloth on the shelf again, then to the quilts in the corner. She wanted to open the place up, he continued. Not just for us, for others passing through. Folks who needed a night, a meal, something steady before they moved on. That sounds like a good thing, she said. It was, he replied. Until the land started failing. Crops got thinner, money got tighter, and people around here stopped believing in anything that didn't bring quick return. And the man tonight? She asked. He's not alone, he said. There are others. Buying up land cheap, waiting for folks like me to fall behind. They say I owe taxes, say I can't keep this place running. Truth is, they just want it empty so they can take it clean. She felt a slow anger rise in her chest. So they push until you give in? That's the plan. Silence settled again, heavier now that the truth had been spoken. You could leave, she said, though the words felt thin even as she said them. And go where? He asked, not harsh, just honest. This is all I've got left of what mattered. Her gaze dropped to her hands. She knew that feeling. Holding on to something not because it was easy, but because letting go meant losing more than just a place. The wind rattled the shutters again, louder this time, like the night itself was pressing in. You don't have much time, she said. End of the week isn't far. I know. She stood and walked slowly toward the quilts, running her fingers across them again. Each one carried a piece of her past, her effort, her way of surviving. She had always seen them as something to trade, something to move along with. But now, in this house, they felt different. You said she believed in filling a house with something living, she said, her back still to him. He watched her carefully. She did, she turned, her eyes steady. Then why let them take it? His jaw tightened slightly. Because believing doesn't always pay what's owed. That man didn't come for belief, she said. He came because he thinks you've already given up. I haven't, he said, though there was a trace of doubt beneath it. She stepped closer. Then don't. The words hung between them, simple but sharp. He looked at her, really looked this time, as if seeing her not as someone passing through, but as someone standing in the middle of his fight. You don't know what you're stepping into, he said. I didn't plan to step into anything, she replied. But I'm here now. Another gust of wind hit the house, and somewhere outside, something loose struck against the wall with a hard crack. The sound made them both turn their heads. Storm's coming, he said. Feels like more than that. They stood in silence, listening to the rising wind, the creak of wood, the restless sound of a place that had stood too long without enough holding it together. After a moment, he moved toward the shelf and picked up the folded cloth. He held it carefully, like it might fall apart if handled wrong. She made this not long before things started turning, he said. Said it was meant to stay here, no matter what happened. He handed it to her. She unfolded it slowly. The stitching was finer than anything she had seen, careful and steady, every piece set with purpose. It was not just a quilt, it felt like a promise. She believed this place could be more than just surviving, he said. I stopped seeing that somewhere along the way. She traced the seams with her fingers, feeling the strength in them. Maybe you didn't stop, she said. Maybe you just forgot? He let out a quiet breath, as if the thought had been waiting for him. Outside, the wind grew louder and the sky rumbled low, the first sign of a storm breaking over the fields. We don't have much time, she said again, her voice firmer now. He nodded, but his expression had shifted, not free of worry, but no longer as still as before. No, he said. We don't. She folded the cloth back carefully and held it out to him, but he shook his head. Keep it for now, he said. Her brows drew together slightly. Why? Because if we're going to hold this place, he said, his voice steady despite the rising storm, it's going to take more than just one person remembering what it was meant to be. The thunder rolled closer, shaking the air around them, and she felt the weight of what he was saying settle deep. This was no longer just about quilts or a single supper. It was about whether something nearly lost could be held onto or taken away for good. And as the storm finally broke over the land, rain striking the roof in sharp, steady beats, she realized that whatever came next would decide more than just the fate of a house on a lonely road. The storm did not pass quickly. Rain fell through the night, steady and hard, soaking the fields and drumming against the roof like a warning that would not quiet down. She stayed, not because she had decided anything yet, but because leaving in the dark felt like turning her back on something unfinished. By morning, the land looked different. The dust had settled and the air felt heavier, cleaner in a way. Water clung to the edges of the fence and pooled in the low places of the yard. He stood on the porch, looking out across the field as if trying to read what the storm had changed. She joined him, holding the folded cloth he had given her. Storm didn't take it down, she said. No, he replied, but it showed where it's weak. They walked the property together that morning. The fence line needed mending in places. Part of the roof had shifted, and the old shed leaned worse than before. It was not ruined, but it was not steady either. You can fix this, she said, glancing at him. Not alone, he answered. The words settled in, quiet but clear. They worked through the day without much talk. He brought tools out, and she helped where she could, holding boards in place, clearing broken pieces, doing the kind of work she had not done in years but found came back to her quickly. It felt different from the road, slower but stronger. As the sun climbed, she noticed something else. The land, though worn, was not empty. Small patches of green pushed through the soil where the rain had reached deep enough. It was not much, but it was there. By afternoon, a wagon appeared on the road. She saw it first and felt her chest tighten. "They're early," she said. He turned, his face hardening slightly as he watched the wagon come closer. It was not just the man from the night before. There were two others with him now, sitting stiff and watchful. "They think the storm did their work for them," he said. The wagon stopped near the gate. The same man stepped down, his boots sinking slightly into the wet ground. He looked around, taking in the house, the patched fence, the signs of work already done. "Looks like you've been busy," he said. "Still standing," the man replied. "For now," the visitor said. His gaze shifted to her. "You're still here." She stepped forward before she could think better of it. "This place isn't empty." He gave a small, knowing look. "Doesn't matter much what it looks like. Matters what's owed." He pulled a folded paper from his coat and held it up. "Taxes behind, payments missed. You know the terms." The man beside her did not reach for the paper. "I know what's written." "Doesn't mean it's right. Right doesn't change what's due," the visitor replied. Silence stretched between them, the kind that decides things. She felt the cloth in her hands, the careful stitching beneath her fingers. Then she looked back at the quilts stacked inside, the work she had carried across miles. Something in her settled. "What if it's paid?" she said suddenly. Both men turned to her. "With what?" the visitor asked. She stepped inside without waiting for permission and returned with the quilts, one by one, laying them across the porch rail. The colors, though worn, stood strong in the daylight, each piece a story of effort and care. "These aren't scraps," she said. "They're work, good work. Worth more than you think." The visitor's eyes narrowed slightly. "Cloth won't cover land. Maybe not alone," she said. "But people will pay for something made right?" "People always do," he gave a short shake of his head. "That takes time you don't have." She met his gaze steady now. "Then we use what we do have." The man beside her seemed to understand before she finished. "You're thinking of selling here," he said. She nodded. "Not door to door. Here, this house. The road runs close enough. Folks pass through. We give them reason to stop." The visitor let out a breath, half amused, half doubtful. "You think a few quilts and a warm meal change anything?" She glanced at the man beside her, then back. It changed something already. For a moment no one spoke. Then one of the men on the wagon shifted and said quietly, "My wife's been looking for something like that." Hand-stitched, the visitor shot him a look, but the seed had been planted. "They're not the only ones," she added. "People are tired of things that don't last. These do." The wind moved lightly across the yard, no longer harsh, just present. The visitor lowered the paper slightly. "Even if you sell them, it won't cover everything." "Maybe not today," the man said beside her. "But it's a start." "And if it's a start," she added, "then you're not taking an empty place. You're taking something that's growing." That seemed to matter more than numbers. The visitor looked from the quilts to the house to the land that now held signs of life again. His expression shifted, not soft, but less certain. "You've got until the end of the week," he said again, though his voice had lost some of its edge. "After that, we settle it proper." He turned and climbed back onto the wagon. This time, when it rolled away, it did not feel like a final warning. It felt like a narrow opening. They stood there for a while after it was gone. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She let out a small breath. "I know. You could have left this morning." "I could have," she agreed. He looked at her, searching for something. "Why didn't you?" She glanced at the quilts, then at the house, then back at him. "Because this doesn't feel like the end of a road. Feels like the start of one worth staying on." The days that followed were not easy, but they were steady. They worked, they mended, and they set up a small table near the road. Travelers stopped, drawn by the sight of quilts and the promise of a warm meal. Some bought, some stayed to talk, and some simply carried the word further down the line. By the end of the week, the house no longer felt empty. It held voices, small moments of kindness, and the quiet strength of something being rebuilt piece by piece. When the wagon returned, it found more than a man holding on to land. It found a place that had begun to live again. And as she stood on the porch beside him, watching another traveler stop at the gate, she realized the road had not taken everything after all. It had led her here, to a door she almost passed by, to a supper she did not expect, and to a reason to stay that felt stronger than anything she had left behind. Some things are not bought with money alone. Some things are built with care, shared with others,